for March 23rd, 2026. And at this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory in the Métis homeland, and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Iska, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. I'll begin with the roll call of committee members. Councillor Morgan.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Rutherford.
Good morning.
Good morning. And do we have any others online? Or are they all in the other meeting?
Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Councillor Parmar.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. And I think that is it. Okay. Now, before we consider today's agenda, I'll ask all members of council present if they have any pecuniary or conflicts of interest to declare regarding any of the items to be discussed. A pecuniary interest exists when an item could monetarily affect a member of council, their employer, or family member. A conflict of interest exists when an item could affect a private interest of a member of council, their employee, or family member. Do any members of council have a pecuniary or conflict of interest to declare? Hearing no declared pecuniary or conflict of interest, we will move to adoption of the agenda. Councillor Morgan.
Sure, I would like to move that we adopt the agenda with the following, that the meeting agenda be adopted.
Thank you very much. Any questions, concerns? Then please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. And approval of the minutes.
Sure, I can.
Councillor Morgan,
Yep.
please.
I'll approve that the minutes from the following meetings be approved: March 2nd, 2026, Community and Public Services Committee, and March 16th, 2026, Community and Public Services Committee, non-regular.
Any errors or omissions? Hearing none, please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. And that is carried. We have no council protocol items, and I'll go to selecting items for debate. Councillor Morgan.
I'll select 7.1.
Thank you. And Councillor Rutherford.
Yes, sorry, I will select the first place program item.
Okay, that is 7-1 that I believe Councillor Morgan just selected.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. And Clerk, do we need to vote on reports not selected, the
Yes.
reschedule?
Yes, it would be to approve the revised due date for 5.1.
Okay. So,
If we could get a motion for that.
okay.
I can motion that.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Any questions, concerns? I do have one, and I'm just wondering, with it being delayed, I put a motion through last week in regards to rental by other organizations, nonprofit groups. Will that be included in the report? Is anybody here?
Councillor Roger Jevon here. That specific recommendation won't be included in the report. The audit reports are essentially done. We'll be an audit committee on April 10th and then back to this committee. But there is a piece in there about pricing and subsidies, and so that we'll still respond to your motion specifically with a separate report.
Okay, thank you very much then. I have nothing further. And we will vote on that. Okay, please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. We do have one request to speak today. And can I have somebody put forward the motion? Councillor Morgan?
Sure. Recommend that Community and Public Services Committee hear from the following speakers in panels when appropriate, completing the first place program: Cynthia Klobel, Dunluce Park Estates Condominium Corporation, in person.
Oh, yeah, we'll just be 2 seconds and then we'll have you come up, Cynthia. Thank you. And please vote to hear from Cynthia Klobel.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. And that is carried. All right. Let me see, where are we at? No specific time on agenda, no council inquiries, no other reports to be dealt with at a different meeting besides what we've rescheduled, no unfinished business, and we'll now move on to 7.1, completing the first place program. And administration, I'm sure, has a presentation. Thank you. Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Good morning, members of committee. My name is Neil Ozaduk, and I'm the Director of Land Development for the City of Edmonton. Today I'm joined by Stuart Carrig from the Housing Action Team and Chris Hodgson from the Real Estate Branch. We're here to present a report that proposes to remove the last four remaining sites from the first place program, which will effectively bring a wind down to the program. Next slide, please. The First Place program was created in 2006 in an effort to support the first-time home buyers in Edmonton. The program offered a 5-year deferral in the land cost to the buyer, which lowered their initial mortgage amounts. Applicants to the program needed to meet various eligibility criteria, some of which included needing to be a first-time home buyer in Alberta, the full-time occupants of the unit for the first 5 years, Canadian citizens, and caps on total net worth and household income. While the City of Edmonton led the program, it would not have been possible to deliver without the contributions from multiple other organizations. 21 surplus school sites were provided by the Edmonton Public School Board and the Edmonton Catholic School District. 16 of those sites have been developed in alignment with the program. 1 site was previously removed in 2021 by Council, and the last 4 sites are proposed to be removed today. The Government of Alberta granted exceptions to the MGA to the city, which streamlined the rezoning and allowed for cost sharing of sale proceeds between the school boards and the city's Affordable Housing Reserve. After public listing, Rohit and Landmark were selected as the city's builder partners to develop the school sites and sell units to first-time homebuyers at a price cap agreed to by the city and builders. Our building partners worked with ATB Financial, BMO Financial, and Service Credit Union to provide mortgages to buyers that allowed for the 5-year land deferral. Next slide, please. The First Place program had 4 major objectives. Objective 1 was to create 1,000 units across all 21 sites. With 5 of the sites not being developed, only 904 units were able to be created. While this does fall short of the total number of units, it does exceed the target on the number of units per site. Objective 2 was to provide opportunities for first-time homebuyers. This was achieved by requiring that applicants to the program be first-time homebuyers in Alberta. Objective 3 was to share the net proceeds with our school board partners who provided the sites. Total net proceeds exceeded $22 million, with half being shared between the boards as indicated on the slide, and the other half going towards the Affordable Housing Reserve. And lastly, Objective 4 required guidelines for public input on the design. This was achieved by having open houses for each site to share information about the program and development. At those open houses, residents were able to sign up to be part of a design committee that worked with the city and builders on items such as layout and other design elements. Next slide, please. Today we're seeking to remove the final 4 sites from the program. This includes sites in Deschênes, La Pearl, Sifton Park, and Dunluce. The site located in Deschênes is in the southwest corner of Deschênes Park and was a former temporary storm pond. When the pond was no longer required, it was backfilled in a manner that prevents the site from being developed without significant reworking of the soils. This is very costly and would come with significant disturbance to the community. As a result, administration is proposing to remove the site from the program and leave it as open space. The site in La Pearl is located on the east side of La Pearl Park. In 2004, a surplus school site in La Pearl East Park was developed into housing. During the following engagement, the community expressed concerns about potential development of the site allocated to the First Place program. As a result, a commitment was made not to develop the La Pearl First Place program site. While this commitment was made at the onset of the program, the site was never formally removed from the program, and today we're proposing to formally remove it and have it continue to function as open space. It should be noted that the site in La Pearl that has been allocated to affordable housing, shown in orange, is a separate site and is still being developed. Next slide, please. While the program has been largely successful, it has become harder to implement. Our builder partners have noted that the program's eligibility requirements combined with the unit price cap, the fact that fewer lenders are willing to provide the deferred mortgage, and technical challenges make it difficult to continue to deliver the program going forward. Potential options to work around these difficulties are to increase the price cap on units to what would be above a typical townhome in the area would sell for, increase the allowable household income and applicant net worth, allow for different product types, and potentially open the program up to applicants who are not first-time homebuyers. These changes would, in some cases, go against the primary purpose the program was created. And even if some of them were implemented, there are fewer lenders willing to participate in the program, which makes it difficult to implement. Both the Dunluce and Sifton Park sites are developable from a technical perspective. However, with the program requirements in place, neither of our builder partners are able to advance these sites. As a result, we circulated both sites throughout the corporation to determine if there was any other potential municipal uses for them. For Dunluce, only affordable housing had an interest in the site. For Sifton Park, both open space and affordable housing had some initial interest. After evaluating both interests, it was determined that affordable housing was a more appropriate use. Some of the justification for the decision was the site was always intended for development and is already rezoned and subdivided. There's an ongoing need to increase the affordable housing supply in Edmonton. The non-market housing ratio in Sifton Park is currently at 6.4%, which is below the 16% target, and the park's allocation is at 3.6 hectares per 1,000 people, which is above the 2 hectares per 1,000 minimum. Taking all this into consideration, the Dunluce and Sifton Park sites, if the Dunluce and Sifton Park sites are removed from the program today, they will be allocated for affordable housing and listed for sale. Due to the success experienced by the First Place program, we intend to accept offers that provide similar benefits and outcomes that the program did, while also accepting offers for more traditional forms of affordable housing. Next slide, please. Today's report is somewhat bittersweet for the real estate branch. We have been delivering this program since 2006. We've seen 16 sites developed, helped 904 individuals, couples, and families find homes, generated $22 million for our school board partners in affordable housing, and we've successfully collaborated with the private sector to deliver the program. I'd like to take this time to thank all of those who made this program possible and successful, including our school board partners, the Edmonton Public School Board and the Edmonton Catholic School District, our builder partners, Rohit and Landmark, our lending partners, ATB Financial, BMO Financial, and Service Credit Union, the Government of Alberta, and the folks who came before me to successfully develop, pilot, and deliver the program, including our very own Tim McCarger, who's sitting over there, who oversaw the development of 14 of the 16 sites. Thank you for your time. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now move on to our public speaker, and before we do that, I'll just outline the process. For each item, administration may provide opening remarks, which they have done. Members of the public approved to speak will then be invited to make their presentations. Speakers will be heard in panels, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to present. The clerk will run the official timer in the meeting room, and it will be displayed in the virtual meeting. The light will be green for the first 4 minutes, turn yellow when there is 1 minute remaining, and flash red when the 5 minutes are up. When everyone in your panel has had a chance to present, members of council may ask questions of you or other panel members. For this reason, please remain in the meeting until all questions have been asked of your panel. If you are participating virtually, please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please reach out to the Office of the City Clerk using the contact information provided in your confirmation of registration or at city.clerk@edmonton.ca. If you're here in person, city staff will guide you to your seat when it's time for your panel. Before we begin our discussion, I want to share my expectations for the conduct of everyone participating to ensure a safe and inclusive environment and workplace. These expectations apply to both in-person and virtual attendees. Hearing from the public is an important part of Council's process, so we know the full diversity of opinions that exist in our community. As meeting chair, my role is not to moderate the nature of the content being discussed, but to ensure behaviors support a safe, respectful, and neutral place for my colleagues, city employees, and the public. Disrespectful comments, including those directed at individual staff members or other speakers, profane language or gestures, and behaviors such as shouting, cheering, or clapping, or political campaigning will not be tolerated. In addition, use of the raise hand feature, chat, emoticon response, or AI note-taking tools in the virtual meeting are not permitted. I will direct the clerk to have security remove anyone violating these expectations. I will not provide any additional warnings. Once removed, the person will not be permitted to rejoin the meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and everyone is welcome to watch online. Clerk, can you call the speaker?
So it's not quite the same process as
It's
calling
public
the speaker.
hearing, yeah.
We just have the one speaker for 7-1, and the public speaker desk is just over here with that computer, so Cynthia can just head over there and she can get going as soon as she's ready.
I don't have a presentation, so do I just hit the button here?
Yeah, so you just make sure the mic is on there and then you can go ahead and provide your comments. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, I'll start my timer as well. Okay. Well, thank you very much for letting me speak here today. It's red now. Oh, it was on. Okay. Thank you very much for letting me speak here today. I've never been to a city council meeting before, whatever this is considered council type meeting. I live in Dunluce. I live right across from what they call the Herblink Park and right across from this development area. I'm president of my condo, Dunluce Park Estates. And I'm partly here on behalf of them, but I'm also here on behalf of myself as a homeowner and many of the people who have shared to me their concerns about the development in this area. I am aware of the First Place program. I am aware that it is ending, and I had long said that I believe in affordable housing and in housing to help people out that do need that. But I did say years ago that our condos within our particular area are only going for about $200,000 a piece for a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouse condo. So I feel that we're in a very affordable neighborhood. We currently do in that park now have doing development that has been already approved. It was shown on the slide up there on the one side of the park for a new affordable housing development of 96 units. It was originally supposed to be 48. They doubled it. Originally, the First Place program was only supposed to be a 46-unit complex right on the corner of the other surplus school site. And I should say other because when I first moved to that neighborhood and I got the documents from the city of Edmonton, there was actually only one surplus school site on that corner. And somehow, over the last 5 years, a second one popped up on the other side of the park, which is the one that's now being developed by Vivid Homes. So I do have a question to the city. I don't know whom I'm supposed to ask. How one site, which is the site that you're considering now as the first place to be redeveloped as affordable housing, how that changed from having the one site on the corner to us having 2 surplus school sites within that area, because it was not there some 20 years ago when I talked with the city planners. So I do have a big question on that, but I just wanted to hit a few points here because I only have a couple minutes. The Dunluce, if those of you have not been to Dunluce, I know Erin Rutherford, I've met her a few times, she's been in our neighborhood. We have a significant amount of condos townhouses, apartment blocks. In fact, the area that you're talking about developing is completely surrounded, except for on the one side there's housing. We have duplexes all along our neighborhood. I feel as though we have done a lot in regards to having high density in our neighborhood and having a lot of affordable housing. We currently have, Savita currently has a two townhouse units, 72 units in total of affordable housing in our neighborhood on 162 Avenue. The development of Vivid Homes is now going to be putting in an additional 96. And my concern is with this 1.2 hectare space, and it's been, 4-story type development, it really concerns me about the pressures to the traffic in our area. We do live on the far, far north edge of the city. I understand, you wanting to develop, and it helps with the tax dollars and getting more people in the neighborhoods, but we are an affordable neighborhood. We provide affordable housing in our neighborhood. We have so many. I wish you would come out and see our neighborhood and see just how many townhouses and apartment blocks and condos that we have out there, and duplexes. So I feel like we're doing our part. The people, myself as a homeowner and as a president of my condo board that lives across from there, we are not happy, obviously. We are going to be missing our green space. With building this new affordable housing on the other side of the park there, Vivid Homes is building, we are going to be now having another 96 units, which means that could potentially be anywhere between 200 and 300 people right on that corner. And the last thing is, of course, I'm talking rather slow here, but parking. I realize the city has their own concept on that. But I can tell you in our 16-unit condo, there's a minimum of 36 vehicles, and we only have one spot per vehicle. Those roads are going to be packed with vehicles. Windrows, which are never cleared up in the winter, we're going to have a lot of problems with traffic and safety issues within our neighborhood if there's another big complex built there. So that's what I wanted to bring to your attention. That's our concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm just wondering, we've got Councillor Rutherford on the board to ask questions of you, so please just stay there. Thanks.
Certainly.
Hi, Cynthia. Good to see you.
Nice
Sorry
to
I'm
see
not
you.
there
Nice
in
to
person.
talk
I'm
to you,
just
Erin.
not I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm just not 100% today, so I apologize. I don't really have any questions for you. I'm a lot of the things that you flagged, I've also flagged to ask of administration. So I just wanted to come on and say thank you for being here. I know this process can be intimidating, and I'll definitely bring forward your question about the 2 surplus school sites and how that came to be, as amongst many of the other questions I know I'll be asking administration related to concerns from the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Anybody else with questions? No, I think Councillor Rutherford is going to seek clarity from administration for you. So.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
May I just ask if any of the questions are answered, do they post them on the website, or do you?
We will actually be asking administration right now questions.
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. So stick around. And then, yeah. Okay, so anybody want to sign up? Councillor Rutherford? Questions for administration? Go ahead, please.
I did, but did Councillor Morgan have questions first? He selected it.
No, I have no questions.
Okay. I guess, yeah, I don't know where to begin with this, so I'll begin with the question from the speaker. Can we get the history of how 2 surplus school sites came to be on this parcel in Herb-Link Park? Especially considering there was already 2 other schools developed in Dunluce. Like, it does seem like there was a lot of school planning.
Yeah, so when the plan was created, there was, I believe, 4 sites total within Dunluce, if you're excluding the new sites on where the Catholic high school is being built and the new public high school will get built.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then 2 of them were developed, and then the other 2 were declared surplus at different times. So it was, the neighborhood was just planned with that many schools.
Can you have it at the ready of when those 2 were, when they were declared surplus?
The first, I believe, was the one that's being developed as affordable housing right now was declared surplus in 2006. And then the one for no, I'm mixing them up. The first place program one was developed in 2000, or surplus in 2006, and then the one for affordable housing was declared surplus in 2009.
That's the one that's being developed by Vivid Homes, the 2009 one.
That's correct.
Okay, and then and then the site that we're talking about today, the 1.2 hectare parcel, was put on the first place program when?
2006.
Okay. And when something's declared a surplus school site, unless there's a redevelopment, there's really no public circulation of that, correct? Like when a site is declared surplus, what is the process for communicating with the community?
When a site is declared surplus by the school boards, it's
Yeah, and taken over by the city.
oh, okay. It's for this particular site, there was engagement that was done when the program was initially created, and then
Yes, for this site, but I'm more thinking about the one that was declared surplus, and I'm just trying to find out was there any communication in 2009 about the current affordable housing site, or was it only when, in recent history, we've been rezoning and developing it that it was discussed publicly? I'm trying to get a sense of historically if that was communicated to the community.
I do believe the intentions of the programs, the separate programs, were communicated out and engaged, but I don't have the specifics of how that was done.
Yeah, so I guess we don't have what I'm understanding is we don't have city policy that when a site becomes surplus, that we communicate that to the neighborhoods unless there's some change in rezoning or development that's happening, alternative to a school on that site.
That's correct.
Yeah, so I think that's a gap that I just like to point out to my committee colleagues that I think really exists, because historically this means that unless somebody is very astute, until 2022, most people in Dunluce wouldn't have even known that the second parcel, the one in orange on the map, was a surplus school site. I I have another round of questions because I'm not going to get through all of them at this time, but I'll just try to ask this first question first. Why wasn't the same consideration, even though there wasn't the same level of public engagement because there wasn't both parcels being identified? Why wasn't there consideration similar to the La Pearl site for the fact that you're developing one parcel already on the site, and so do both need to be developed as affordable on the same site?
I can't speak to the actual commitment that was made on the La Pearl site. That was back in 2007, so almost 20 years ago. But with this site, we did contemplate other potential uses for the site. So when we heard from our building partners for the First Place program that they were not able to develop the site, we did do a circulation throughout the corporation to determine if there's another use, and
Yeah.
the only use
You're
that
saying
came
all
up-
the stuff that I know in the report, but I'll come back for a second round.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. I do have just a couple questions, and maybe it does go to the circulation to other departments and that. So, so with our parks, sorry, is there any like minimum open space requirements for a neighborhood?
Yep. So generally speaking, with the old UPMP standard, it's 2 hectares per 1,000 people is what we look for in a community. That gets changed a little bit with Breathe now. They look at areas outside of the community as well. And this area is like, Dunluce has 53 hectares of open space in it. And when you break it down, it's 8.5 hectares per 1,000 people. So it's very well served from an open space perspective.
Okay, and is that similar? I'm looking at one of the first place home that was set up in like Larkspur neighborhood, and that took away a lot of open space and soccer fields and that. Would you happen to have the stats for that of what it is per hectare there?
I could probably get them for you.
Okay, I just want to see if this is sort of unusual or if it is normal. And what about the density?
The density of Dunluce?
Yeah.
We might be able to get you that too. I don't have that.
Okay, and then again, I just want to see, is this unusual sort of circumstances? Okay, and then Councillor Rutherford did ask about the 2 sites. Okay, the affordable housing then that would be looked at. The speaker talked about you talked about the price of a typical townhome would be higher under the first place program. If first place program was to go in there now, would an affordable housing site reduce that price?
Yeah, so the thing about the first place program is it's still market rate development. So it doesn't get any subsidies. What we do is we defer the land cost. So right now, with what the land cost would be and what the way we put in a price cap on the unit is we look at what townhomes go for in the area and we say you can't be any more than that. But with all the restrictions of the program, one of the things we heard from the builders was with that price cap, they can't develop the units in the program, so they would need a higher price cap, which would put it, essentially above what a typical home or typical townhome in Dunluce would go for.
Is that just because the cost of construction has escalated so much?
Yeah, it's the cost of construction. I think it's the timeline that they sell out the units. It's a variety of factors.
Okay, I think that's all I have. And Councillor Rutherford for a second round. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't muted. So just going back to the question, so I think when we're looking at process though, it seems like a very different process was allowed to La Pearl with, knowing that both parcels were on the same park space, and then being able to, during that public engagement in 2007, advocate for their concerns about the 2 park spaces versus in Dunluce, that conversation about the first place program happening and engagement happening with the community prior to the second surplus site even being contemplated or on any maps. So that's where I'm seeing a bit of an inequity here and now we're honoring that commitment we made to La Pearl, but the residents in Dunluce didn't have that same ability to engage in those same conversations. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would. I would just say commitments, like we have a process that we follow with surplus school sites, with surplus properties in general. This site did follow that process. I think if there is a desire to deviate from that process at council's direction or committee's direction, like we would take that.
Well, I think that what I've seen in affordable housing projects through my time is an inequity that emerges. And I've been very vocal in highlighting, I guess one of my questions is, can you tell me, is there any number of affordable housing units, but breakdown by ward?
We typically, this is Stuart Carrig from the Housing Action Team. We typically
Yeah.
go by the neighborhood, as that's what the direction previously received from council is. So we don't have a available breakdown by ward in the moment, but we could do that.
Yeah, but I mean, so this is where I think the policy is interesting, because you say 16 plus per neighborhood, 16% per neighborhood. How many neighborhoods in Edmonton hit that 16% mark?
I believe offhand it's about 4 or 5.
And they're mostly downtown, right?
Not necessarily. They are out on the periphery of downtown, and another one in the west end.
What neighborhoods are those?
I need a moment to pull those up.
Yeah, so the reason I'm bringing this up is because when you have that policy, basically and then you only look at the neighborhood level, you're basically never going to hit a neighborhood that doesn't have that. But what I'm seeing is there's still some neighborhoods that have 0%, and then other neighborhoods that are continually adding affordable housing. Again, in my time on council, I have approved many an affordable housing project, and I would say, anecdotally, at least of the affordable housing projects that have been done, 9 of them have been in the ward in the last 5 years alone, including one in Dunluce, the one aforementioned by Vivid Homes. Like, are we not looking? It does feel like there is a disproportionate amount coming to the Northwest, as wanting to make sure that we're, having affordable housing spread out across the city.
One of my colleagues has just informed me we actually do have that available by the ward. And so your ward is 6.9% is the non-market housing ratio. That would be the second highest after O'Day Min, which is at 9.2%.
Yeah. And how many affordable housing projects and how many units of affordable housing have we added to Ward and Ilnick in the last 5 years?
That I would need a few moments.
I would like to know that number, if not today, because this ultimately will go to council, and that's going to be important information for me. I will just indicate now that I am working on a motion to my colleagues on committee. I would like to remove the Dunluce site from the consideration. Well, it can be removed from the consideration for the removal of the the first place program, but I'd like it to be considered in the same vein as La Pearl, where it would then be turned to park space. So I'm working on that motion. And I can do another round of questions too before that, but I wanted to indicate my intent.
All right, seeing no one else on the board, Councillor Rutherford, go ahead.
So I want to go to this question about park space too, because this is again where I'm starting to see some of these things with policy and how they actually play out in real time. I know that Dunluce has a lot of green space, but what percentage of that green space is the district park that is Castle Downs Park, which is really on the the southeast corner? Because I think there's also in Breathe, doesn't it talk about access within, like, to quality park space within certain distances from, where people live and work? Like, isn't there like similar to transit, a walking? So yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of that.
We don't have anybody here from Open Space to specifically talk about how Breathe, what they take into consideration, but you are correct. They look at the variety of types of open space in the community and open space that's adjacent to their community.
Yeah, because I think there's a quantity and then there's a quality question, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I want to understand the quality component of this. So given this has to go to council anyway, and given that administration doesn't have some of the answers, and I'd like to get a few more answers for them before putting a motion on, I would like to requisition this to council.
requisition.
Okay, thank you very much. Hearing requisition twice, this item will be requisitioned to council. Next meeting, clerk, do we know?
I believe the next meeting is April 15th.
And there's room on the calendar for it?
We will make room.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this item will be going to all of council for decision, April 15th. And Councillor Rutherford, you'll have your motion prepared at that time?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I think that completes that item and also our agenda for today. There's any responses to council inquiries, private reports, any motions pending, notices of motions and motions without customary notice. Seeing none of that, we are adjourned at 10:11. Thank you, everyone.